Antonio lived in a stately mansion, surrounded by meticulously tended gardens, ancient trees that whispered stories of the past, and fountains that murmured songs of forgotten times. He was 80 years old, a widower for a decade, and despite his vast fortune, his life was shrouded in a curtain of loneliness. He was a man of medium height, with silver hair that shone like the moon on a clear night. His eyes, once full of life, now reflected the sadness of years of emotional abandonment. Despite having 5 successful children, the distance between them was not only geographical, but also emotional. Antonio's children were immersed in their own lives, busy with careers and families, leaving little time for their elderly father. The mansion, once a place of joy and celebration, was now a sanctuary of silence. Antonio's only constant companion were his 2 maids, Joanna and Beatrice. Joanna, a robust woman in her 50s, looked after the kitchen and the daily needs of the house. Beatrice, younger and more energetic, was responsible for cleaning and maintenance. Both were dedicated and affectionate, but the professional nature of her relationship with Antonio limited the depth of their bond. However, there was one light in Antonio's life: his grandson Pedro. Pedro was a young man of 25, with a vibrant spirit and a heart full of kindness. He visited his grandfather often, bringing a breath of youth and joy to the mansion. Pedro and Antonio would share long, deep conversations, reliving memories and discussing the events of the world. One day during one of these visits, Pedro found Antonio slumped in his favorite armchair, looking at an old photo of his late wife. "Grandpa, are you all right?" asked Pedro, taking a seat next to him. Antonio sighed, his eyes moist with longing. "Ah, Pedro, life is a heavy burden when you don't have someone to share it with." Pedro held Antonio's hand, trying to convey some comfort. "I'm here, Grandpa, and I always will be. But maybe you need someone to help you more closely, on a daily basis. Someone who can give you a little more attention." The prospect of helping someone regain their mobility was inspiring, and the mansion where he lived looked like something out of a fairy tale. Clara was a young woman with wavy brown hair, sparkling eyes, and a smile that radiated warmth and sincerity. When she arrived at the mansion for the first time, she was enchanted by the grandeur of the place. The wrought iron gate opened to reveal a long avenue lined with majestic trees that led to the imposing colonial-style house. On entering the mansion, Clara was greeted by Joanna, who led her into the living room where Antonio was waiting for her. Antonio, sitting in his favorite armchair, looked up when he heard Clara's light footsteps and smiled when he saw the young woman. "Text here, text here, text here." It was a house full of laughter and running around. My children played everywhere, and my wife, Maria, had a laugh that filled the house with joy. But now, all that seemed so far away. Clara noticed the sadness in Antonio's eyes and decided that she would do her best to bring some of that joy back into his life. Little by little, Clara's presence began to transform the atmosphere in the mansion. She encouraged Antonio to go out more, to get involved in small activities that he had previously abandoned. Clara wasn't just a physiotherapist, she became a friend, someone who genuinely cared about Antonio's well-being. As the months passed, the friendship between Antonio and Clara grew stronger. Antonio began to look forward to Clara's visits, not just for the exercise, but for the conversations and laughter they shared. Clara, for her part, discovered in Antonio an inexhaustible source of wisdom and fascinating stories. He told her about his youth, his travels, and about Maria, the woman he loved deeply. "She was the love of my life," said Antonio, looking at an old photo in his office. "Losing her was like losing a part of myself." Clara felt a squeeze in her heart when she heard this. "I'm sorry, Mr. Antonio, but I think Maria would be happy to see that you are recovering and living well." One day, during an exercise session, Clara suggested something different. "Mr. Antonio, have you ever thought about writing your memoirs? Your stories are so rich and inspiring. It would be wonderful to record them." Antonio looked at Clara, surprised. "Writing my memoirs? I've never thought about it. But it's an interesting idea. Do you really think it would be worth it?" Clara nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. Your children and grandchildren would love to read your stories, and it would be a way of leaving a legacy." Antonio pondered Clara's suggestion and, after a few days, decided to start writing. Clara helped him typing while he narrated his memories. The process brought new energy into Antonio's life. He felt motivated and enthusiastic, and writing became an activity he looked forward to every day. Antonio's children, however, began to notice the changes in their father's routine. Sporadic visits became a little more frequent, driven by curiosity about the young woman who spent so much time with him. On one of these visits, Eduardo, the eldest son, approached Antonio about Clara. "Dad, who is this girl who is always here?" asked Eduardo with a hint of suspicion in his voice. Antonio answered calmly, without lifting his eyes from the manuscript he was writing. "She's my physiotherapist. She's also a friend. She's helping me regain my mobility and write my memoirs." Eduardo frowned. "Are you sure she doesn't have other intentions? I don't want someone taking advantage of you." Antonio raised his eyes, looking directly at Eduardo. "Clara is a good person. She really cares about me, something that I have to say has been rare among my own children." Antonio's words made Eduardo uncomfortable, but he didn't insist. Clara, for her part, continued her work with the same dedication, oblivious to the suspicions that were beginning to form among Antonio's children. Time passed, and the friendship between Antonio and Clara grew into something deeper. Antonio, who had long given up hope of finding joy in life, began to see Clara as a new light. She had not only helped him to regain some of his mobility, but also to rediscover happiness and purpose. However, the suspicions of Antonio's children continued to grow. They saw Clara's constant presence as a threat to the inheritance they had one day hoped to receive. Furtive conversations and suspicious glances became frequent whenever Clara was around. One evening, while Pedro was visiting his grandfather, Antonio decided to reveal his plan. "Pedro, I need your help to test the true nature of your parents and Clara," he said with a serious expression. Pedro looked at his grandfather, intrigued. "What do you have in mind, Grandpa?" Antonio explained his plan to pretend to be bankrupt and announce the sale of the mansion. "I want to see who really cares about me and who is only interested in my money. It will be a test of trust." Pedro reluctantly agreed, worried about the impact the lie might have on everyone involved, but understanding Antonio's need to clarify his feelings. The next day, Antonio gathered his children and Clara in the living room. "I have important news for you all," he began, his voice carrying an unusual gravity. "I'm broke. I need to sell the mansion to pay off my debts." The reaction was immediate and varied. Text here. His children, on the other hand, began to argue about the situation, clearly demonstrating that they were more concerned about the loss of their inheritance than their father's well-being. The news of Antonio's forced bankruptcy brought his children back to the mansion with a frequency not seen for years. They tried to convince him to reconsider the sale, suggesting other solutions, but their concerns were transparent. Antonio watched every word, every gesture carefully, trying to discern the true motivation behind their actions. Clara continued to care for Antonio with the same dedication, without letting herself be shaken by the suspicions and tension that permeated the house. She knew that Antonio was going through a difficult time and wanted to be by his side, offering all the support she could. One afternoon, while Antonio was sitting in the garden with Clara, he decided to reveal the truth. "Clara, I need to tell you something. The story about the bankruptcy, it's a lie." Clara looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean, Mr. Antonio?" Antonio sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "I made up the story about the bankruptcy to test the true nature of my children. I wanted to see who really cared about me and who was only interested in my money." Clara was silent for a moment, absorbing the revelation. "I see. And what have you discovered so far?" Antonio looked into Clara's eyes, seeing the sincerity and genuine concern that had always been there. "I've discovered that you're a wonderful person, Clara. You really care about me, something my own children seem to have forgotten." Clara held Antonio's hand, her eyes shining with tears. "Mr. Antonio, I will always be here for you, no matter what happens." Over time, the tension in the house began to dissipate as Antonio's children realized that the situation was not as hopeless as they had thought. Antonio decided to gather everyone together for one last chat. "I lied about the bankruptcy," he began, seeing the shock and confusion on his children's faces. I wanted to test your true nature, to see who really cared about me." Antonio's children fell silent, their expressions a mixture of shame and relief. Text here: "I forgive you. Let's move on together as a family." Shortly after this revelation, Antonio began to realize that his time was coming to an end. He wanted to ensure that his legacy was preserved and that his intentions were clear. He called Pedro into his office to discuss the will. "Pedro, I want you to be responsible for taking care of the reading of my will," said Antonio, handing his grandson a sealed envelope. Pedro took the envelope with a lump in his throat. "Grandpa, don't talk like that. We still have a lot of time together." Antonio smiled sadly. "I know, my dear. But life is uncertain, and I want to make sure everything is done right." When Antonio passed away a few weeks later, the family was devastated by the loss. The mansion, which had once seemed so empty, was now full of people, but lacked the presence that brought the place to life. Pedro gathered everyone in the living room for the reading of the will. Antonio's children were nervous, while Clara stood next to Pedro, her face pale but serene. "Dear children and grandchildren," Peter began, reading Antonio's letter, "this is my last wish. I hope you can understand and respect my decisions." The will revealed that Antonio had left half his fortune and the mansion to Pedro, 20% to charities and 30% to his children. For Clara, he had left a life insurance policy worth 1 million reais and a safe deposit box at the bank. Antonio's children were initially shocked by the division, but the biggest surprise was in the contents of the safe. When Clara opened the safe, she found only a letter and a glass of iced coffee. The letter read, "Clara, you have brought warmth and joy to my life in recent years. This coffee symbolizes the cold and bitter love you sometimes offered me, but also the comfort I found in your presence. Thank you for everything." Clara held the coffee cup, tears rolling down her face. She understood the deep meaning of Antonio's gesture and felt a wave of sadness and gratitude at the same time. After the reading of the will, life in the mansion began to change. Pedro, now responsible for the house and half of Antonio's fortune, decided to honor his grandfather's legacy in a meaningful way. He invited Clara to continue living in the mansion and to work with him on charity projects, using the resources Antonio had left to help those in need. Pedro and Clara became partners in running the mansion and the new charity initiatives. Together, they set up programs to support lonely elderly people, offering physical and emotional assistance, something Antonio would have deeply appreciated. One afternoon, while Clara and Pedro were in the office, she turned to him and said, "Pedro, I think your grandfather would be proud of us. We're doing exactly what he wanted, bringing love and care to those who need it most." Pedro smiled, feeling reassured by Clara's words. "I'm sure of that, Clara." During one of these events, Clara met Anna, a young neighbor who had always shown affection for Antonio. Anna had become a beloved figure in the mansion, often visiting and helping Clara and Pedro with their activities. "Anna, you've become an important part of all this," said Clara, holding the young woman's hand. "We're very grateful for your help and dedication." Anna smiled shyly. "I just want to help. Mr. Antonio was very kind to me, and I want to honor his memory." Pedro, overhearing the conversation, approached. "Anna, you're always welcome here. This house is now a place for everyone who wants to do good." As the months went by, Pedro and Clara's initiative began to gain recognition in the community. "Mr. Antonio was very kind to me, and I want to honor his memory." Pedro, overhearing the conversation, approached. "Anna, you're always welcome here. This house is now a place for everyone who wants to do good." As the months went by, Pedro and Clara's initiative began to gain recognition in the community. He was a wise man, and thanks to him, we're doing something that really matters. Pedro took Clara's hand, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for her. "Thank you for being by my side, Clara. I couldn't have done it without you." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "We're in this together, Pedro, and we'll continue to honor Antonio's legacy, bringing love and care to everyone who crosses our path." Antonio's mansion, now transformed into a vibrant community center, continued to grow and evolve. Pedro and Clara began to expand their activities, offering more services and programs to the community. They organized cultural events, lectures, and workshops, creating a space where everyone felt welcome. Pedro and Clara's partnership blossomed not only at work but also in their personal lives. They developed a deep bond based on mutual respect and admiration. Clara became part of Pedro's family, and together they continued to honor Antonio's memory in everything they did. One day, as they were walking through the garden, Pedro stopped and looked at Clara. "Clara, you have brought so much joy and purpose to my life and the lives of so many other people. I can't thank you enough." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with affection. They developed a deep bond based on mutual respect and admiration. Clara became part of Pedro's family, and together they continued to honor Antonio's memory in everything they did. One day, as they were walking through the garden, Pedro stopped and looked at Clara. "Clara, you have brought so much joy and purpose to my life and the lives of so many other people. I can't thank you enough." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with affection. Text here. Joanna and Beatrice, who had looked after Antonio for so many years, were present, emotional and proud of the path Pedro and Clara had taken. "Mr. Antonio would be so happy," said Joanna, wiping away a tear. "You've brought joy back to this house." Clara held Joanna's hand, feeling the deep connection they all shared. "We're just continuing what he started." Text here. Pedro and Clara celebrated the news with the community, organizing a big event at the mansion. "This recognition is proof of the positive impact we can have when we work together," Pedro told the gathered crowd. "Thank you all for being part of this journey." Over the years, Antonio's story and the legacy he left behind have continued to inspire generations. The mansion has become a symbol of love, compassion, and dedication to the community. Clara and Pedro, now an established couple, continued to lead the community center with passion and commitment. They created a memorial in Antonio's honor, a space where everyone could learn about his life, his achievements, and the transformation he inspired. Pedro and Clara told his story to everyone who visited, ensuring that Antonio's memory remained alive. "This place is not just a house," said Clara on a guided tour. "It's a testimony to the power of love and generosity. Antonio taught us that true wealth lies in the connections we make and the impact we have on people's lives." The letter left by Antonio to Clara has become an important document in the history of the community center. It was read at special ceremonies, reminding everyone of the profound meaning of his words and actions. "Clara, you brought warmth and joy to my life in my last years. This coffee symbolizes the cold and bitter love you sometimes offered me, but also the comfort I found in your presence. Thank you for everything." Antonio's words resonated with a mixture of sadness and gratitude, reminding everyone of the complexity of human relationships and the importance of treasuring every moment. Clara kept the coffee cup in a prominent place, a symbol of the imperfect but deeply meaningful love they shared. Pedro and Clara continued to expand their activities, always looking for new ways to serve the community and honor Antonio's legacy. They opened new facilities, created partnerships with other organizations, and attracted volunteers from all over the country. The mansion became a model community center, inspiring other localities to create similar spaces. Clara and Pedro traveled, sharing their experiences and knowledge, helping to spread Antonio's message about the true meaning of love and family. On one of these trips, Clara reflected on Antonio's impact on their lives. "He taught us so much." Text here. Pedro and Clara's children were involved in the community center's activities from an early age, helping with the daily chores and learning about the importance of serving others. The mansion was full of life and energy, a beacon of hope and kindness. "We're creating a better future for everyone," said Pedro, watching his children play in the garden, "and it all started with Antonio's love and vision." Clara agreed, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "He would be so proud to see how his influence has spread, and we will continue to honor his memory every day." Pedro and Clara's tireless work led to impressive results. The mansion was not only a community center, but a living example of the power of love and compassion. They received awards and recognition for their contributions, but the greatest prize of all was seeing the difference they made to people's lives. One day, Peter reflected on everything they had achieved. "Clara, look at all this. We've made Antonio's dream come true. His vision of a place where love and generosity prevail has come true. Clara smiled, feeling immensely happy. Yes, Pedro, and we will continue to expand this dream, taking Antonio's message to even more people. Over the years, Pedro and Clara faced the loss of some of the friends and volunteers who had become part of the mansion's family. These farewells were painful, but they also reminded them of the importance of cherishing every moment. At one of these farewells, Clara spoke on behalf of everyone. Life is made up of moments and connections. Each person who passes through here leaves a mark, a memory, and we continue to honor each one of them, keeping alive the spirit of generosity and love that Antonio taught us. Pedro added, and we will continue to build on this legacy, always remembering what really matters in life. Pedro and Clara's journey has been marked by challenges and triumphs, but above all by love. They learned that the true meaning of love is not in words or grandiose gestures, but in daily actions, in the little things we do for each other. One quiet night, as they watched the stars, Peter reflected on this. Clara, our love is Antonio's true legacy. He taught us to really love, to care about others, and to make a difference in the world. Clara agreed, feeling a deep peace. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. And that love will live on through everyone who passes this way. And so Antonio's legacy lived on, an eternal testimony to the true meaning of love and family. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with emotion, and that love will live on through everyone who passes this way. And so Antonio's legacy lived on, an eternal testimony to the true meaning of love and family.